Welcome, everyone, to the official, I want to say 15th episode of Coffee and Philosophy. I don't know, does that sound right to you, Cope? You've probably been on like half of them. Yeah, I want to say I want to say I think we're on 15 now, but I can't really call it anymore, man. There's so many of these shows we've been doing lately. Well, thanks for coming on again with me tonight, and I think later we're going to be joined by the one and only Dflo. You can't hear Cope. We're all Cope. How can you not hear Cope? You're not muted for me. I mean, I'm hearing you, and if I hear you, they should be able to hear you because it comes through my desktop audio. Pretty sure they're trolling. Okay. Well, it doesn't really make sense that they wouldn't be able to hear you because, actually, hold on a second. Maybe my desktop audio is not picking up.
Mhm.
Okay, there we go. I had to actually go and reinitialize like my desktop audio. That's I swear, guys, I really thought y'all were trolling me tonight.
That's so good it happens, man.
I mean, I figured it was par for the course. I mean, I'm trolling half the time anyway.
Oh, good. So, all good. Everyone can hear now. We're all up to speed, on the same page. Everything's happening. Yes.
There's
Can
now
get some.
Cope and Cope, so you now have both Copes here.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Okay, well, apologize for the trolling accusations, audience. I mean, I like to be honest. I mean, this is the audience on a show that I host, so I mean, it's only fair to assume that you guys would be trolling me.
That's mean, man. That's mean. Stereotyping.
I mean, like, what's 90% of my server interactions? Dropping gifs and memes. But no, and I actually kind of wanted to talk about something tonight that I was thinking about earlier this week, and I think it's something that like we've touched on in the past a little bit, and it's the concept of confirmation bias.
Yep, that's a big one.
So, like I think it, especially like whenever we get into like people like quoting statistics, right? I think people don't understand like how inherently confirmation bias is ingrained into like the practice of even creating statistics, right? Because I mean, like I think
hmm
there are some questions that never get asked if you don't have an inherent confirmation bias to ask them in the first place.
hmm Yeah. And look, the thing is that there is things in place to try and minimize confirmation bias as you're sort of like dealing with these things. Let's say like in the science like realm, there's like if you have a particular bias, what you should be doing is disclosing that in some way, shape, or form in your writings. And this is mainly, when we're looking at discourse analysis and that kind of thing. So there's a difference between qualitative and quantitative data. And quantitative is, just your numbers game, but qualitative is when you're doing things more like discourse analysis and these kinds of things. But it is good practice, and this is something that's sort of been said to me like quite a few times by some of the scientists that I was speaking with, talking to, and learning from. And they were saying, look, qualitative is kind of like frowned upon, and quantitative should really look at some of the methods and apply them within their sciences. So, and one of those things is a reflective statement, which is essentially, if you like, it doesn't matter what position you have in the situation. If you're going in and studying something, you're going to have some kind of opinion on it. So what you should be doing is saying, okay, look, I'm studying this thing, but I come from, say for instance, like a Christian background that thinks that, what this study entails is bullcrap kind of thing, because that, even just that mindset, as you are looking at these things, it can create these confirmation biases, which can heavily influence the outcome of what it is that you're looking at, what you're observing, and what you're studying.
Right. And see, I think it's like there are some obvious confirmation biases, right? Like if we go into something with an agenda, and like basically we're looking for evidence to prove or disprove something, which I think is kind of like inherently flawed in the first place, right? Because if we're trying to prove or disprove something, that means but that's an inherent confirmation bias because we automatically have a stance on it in the first place, right? So it's like, like we look at like statistics that get thrown around, like homicide rates are higher among like the African American population, right? Well, that's basically taking the entire dynamic of homicide rates, and it's saying that you're gonna narrow them down by something that's kind of like unrelated, right? And I mean, we can draw a correlation, obviously. I mean, there's always going to be data to draw correlations with, but is it any worse if two white people shoot each other than it is if two like African American people shoot each other?
Well, again, we'd be looking at one of those things where it comes down to the observer and their own thoughts on the situation in regards to that, because we're going to have varying outcomes to that question depending on who you ask. But realistically, objectively speaking, that is, no, there is no difference. It's two people killing each other, long and short.
Right, and I mean, like we can look at other things too, like sexual assault, and say like it's statistically it's more likely that if a sexual assault occurs, it's going to be perpetuated by a man, but it's still sexual assault, right? So like I mean, I think like the very nature of like trying to like specify some of these statistics and asking these questions are kind of like missing the forest for the trees, right? Like, I think the real question would be why are people raping each other, and like kind of what can we do to prevent things like rape? What can we do to prevent things like homicide? I think whenever we start like throwing statistics around, what we're trying to basically do is say, well, like obviously the African American community has such a higher problem with homicide. I can kind of like wash my hands of it at this point, right? If I'm not African American, then it's not really my problem.
Yeah.
Uh,
And yeah, look, I think that's part of the situation as well. As we have, like as human beings, we have this kind of like, again, ingrained in us, maybe put on us from birth, all that kind of thing, where we categorize things. It's just like something that we do. Like as soon as you're born, you're male or you're female, and there's nothing in between. It's very binary. And as you sort of like go through these processes, you start learning to find things, put them in boxes, and go, okay, this is what this is. It goes in this box with all my brain data that knows everything about this situation. So you can turn around. This is where stereotypes and things come from. So you attach these things together and you put them in these little boxes, and it's supposed to help you. And it does, in some sense, it does help you, like organize your life and make things, make quick decisions based on these schemas. But the problem is there are exceptions to these rules. There are differences, and this is where we have the issue between our quick judgments and what the truth is. There is a distinct difference between the two, and we do need to take the time and focus on these things to establish the discrepancies between our thoughts and beliefs and the objective reality.
Right. And see, like it's one thing that I've just kind of been, thinking about this week, and I see Avian Flu says that he looks like writing a post about it. Hey, I don't know, like one of the things that like kind of like led me down this train of thought as I was discussing, and this can actually be a future show, I believe, but I was discussing with someone the concept of like different religions and like how they interpret the alleged word of God, right? And
Hmm.
I mean, I know you and I are both familiar with the whole allegory of the cave from Plato. I mean, like we've discussed it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Basically, my thoughts are like, let's say like one of us had like a direct experience, right? Like God parted the skies and spoke to us personally. They
Hmm.
told us like the rules to live by. I think there's an inherent confirmation bias in just how we receive that information because obviously the way we interpret and hear is going to be based on all of our subjective experiences. And then anyone we relay that information to is going to have their own confirmation bias from their own personal experience. And essentially, the Word of God would be lost as soon as the first person heard it. Like, I mean, does that sound rational to you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. When you start thinking about, yeah, and again, we're delving into like the whole. This is a very deep philosophical thought here, but like, because how you perceive things in your mind, even if you tell it to the exact detail as possible, like you cannot affect the way that somebody observing that, how they see it, how they take it in their perspective, and the spin that they put in, utilizing their schemas and things to put these concepts in place. You have no control over that. So every single time that this, so if you tell me the story, I tell someone else's story, that person tells someone else's story, it continues to evolve, it continues to change through the just through the simple mechanisms that we have in place as a human being to take in this information and then pass it on. It just changes. We have to accept that.
Right. And so like the whole reason we kind of like got into this train of thought was that basically like my stance is the Bible is inherently corrupted through like human interaction.
Yeah.
Hang on one second. I'm gonna I'm gonna drag Dflo in because she's gonna be joining us, and just she can kind of like get caught up and jump in whenever she's ready. But everyone, if you haven't heard the absolutely lovely voice of Dflo, then tonight we shall give you a gift to grace your ears.
Yay.
Hello, Dflo.
Hello.
How's it
Thank
going?
you for good. Thank you for inviting me.
For sure. Um, Basically, me and Cope have just been kind of like talking about the concept of confirmation bias and how, like, basically inherently, like existing, like the very nature of just like our existence and observing anything is going to always be kind of like reflective and indicative of that existence, right? Like there's no way to zero sum out all of our collective experiences from going through life and think that they don't in some way like shade or color everything we observe, everything that we say or do.
Yes, it reminds me of phenomenology, which is like a philosophy about um, the way that we have a reciprocal relationship with our environment. So, like things, and just as much as we project on to them.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. And I mean, I agree. I think we get into like a lot of these different like topics, a lot of these different conflicts that are basically perpetuated by the fact that whenever we start trying to like separate out things and view them as fundamentally different, right? Like say like if I want to throw out some statistics at you, right? I'm going to say first of all I'm taking humanity and dividing it into a subset of North America. I'm going to further divide that into the United States. What I'm going to do from there is say, like, all homicides in the United States, here's every, like, fact we know about them, right? And then I'm going to look at every homicide and I'm going to say, okay, so, like, such and such percent of these homicides were perpetuated by the African American community against its, like, own members. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to basically start creating a whole dialogue around this one set of information. Now, are there situations where this data may or may not be more useful? I mean, I guess that's kind of like subjective, but I mean, I feel like fundamentally what we're doing is we're missing the forest for the trees here whenever we start like pigeonholing and looking at, like particular aspects of larger problems. Like, why do we live in an aggressive society where the answer is to, like assault or kill someone whenever we have disagreements, or like what are the fundamental problems that are leading people to do things like sexually assault another person. I think like the further we pigeonhole these issues and we start looking at like different statistics, that we're ultimately like looking for a way to say that, well, if I don't fit in this category, then it's fundamentally not really my problem, right?
Yeah. Right. I think that is the almost the whole purpose of using like statistics or data or um, certain labels and stuff to divide people or categorize them, is to just like remove responsibility from yourself from being a part of the problem and part of the solution, really. It's really generalizing too, but I can see what you're saying at least. I think there's no way to come up with like one nice tidy summary for like what all the problems are, but
Oh
I
yeah.
think that is something that's true, that people often, and I would say that that's the way the statistics are often used, is to deflect those bigger things, like what you're saying.
Well, I agree. That they're deflecting from bigger topics, but I think like part of the problem is whenever we create these statistics, they get used and create stereotypes for totally unrelated things. So, like, say, obviously, we know there's a lot of children in protective services or orphanages around the country. Now, if I'm a heterosexual white male in a relationship, like let's say I'm married to a heterosexual white female, then statistically I'm more likely to be able to adopt a child because statistically I'm a better parent. Now, I think that that is obviously complete garbage, and I think that's a very negative way to actually look at these things. But I mean, like ultimately, that's what these statistics end up getting used for, right? Or like whenever we look at things like assault, or we look at problems that are like basically like violent crimes, and we relate them to categories of people, and then we use those determining statistics to dictate whether or not other things should happen as like drawn out conclusions. I think it basically omits the fact that people are individuals, and it looks at, like your physical characteristics or your background, things that like you really didn't have any control over, and it tries to determine your future based off of them. So we kind of like become self-fulfilling prophecies in the fact that we're inherently discriminating against each other, and we're basically oppressing each other by using these statistics that ultimately don't necessarily relate to what we use them for.
The meme that only the pony put in there. But what I'm wondering is why only 53% of the statistics are made up? Like, why not 65 or
Yeah, when I usually quote that kind of thing, what I like to do is something along the lines of say something is, 53% of statistics are all made up, including this one kind of thing. So you add, the one that you're putting forward as part of that. So you can say any number that you want to, and it works.
Okay. I see the other one now.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's enjoyable and funny.
Right, and I feel like the fact that we are, I don't know, personally, it's extremely rare that you're going to ever hear me quote a statistic to support any kind of like stance that I'm taking on anything, because like I try to look at everyone as fundamentally equal and individual. Like I try not to take things like like skin color, gender, like things that I feel like are completely irrelevant to other topics. I try not to let them have any kind of like sway in my mind. And I think like whenever we address some of these issues from like a societal view, then that's kind of like I think leading to some of our problems, right? Like if we teach women that you're like let's throw out a rough number here. Let's say it's 90% more likely that you're going to be sexually assaulted by a man. Obviously, you're going to probably be more cautious towards, like associating with men than you would women, right?
Possibly, but yeah, you can't. I mean, yes, there's a
Uh,
logic to that.
right. I'm saying like if that's your only information to go off of, and like you're a child, you're being raised in a society that teaches you should be afraid of men, because most of them are going to try to sexually assault you. Like 90% of all sexual assaults are from men. Now, and then we could even break it down further and say out of those 90%, let's say 80% of those are going to be African American men. So now, not only are you going to be biased against men, but you're going to also be biased against African American men. Or we could say like, like even like let's go in a whole different direction. Like let's say 60% of white males are going to die from a heart attack, or like something like that, right? So in general, I should be more worried about having a heart attack than I should be about somebody shooting me. So I can put someone shooting me out of my mind, and like the only real thing I need to do is worry about watching, what I eat and exercising appropriately, and then I should be safe. And I think that's completely asinine, right? Like it's taking unrelated things and trying to shoehorn like what you should be more cautious about. But ultimately, we're all different. We're all unique individuals, and I really don't think things like ethnicity, gender, really determine who you are, like on a fundamental level. And I mean, I think if someone is going to be the type of person that shoots and kills another person for something trivial, like some belongings or, like a disagreement, then th- they're going to be that type of person, whether they're male, female, Caucasian, Asian, African. I don't think these are the kind of things that really weigh into that decision. But we still, use statistics to break down these facts, and society perpetuates these ideas that that's how we should view different categories of people.
I just lose my connection.
It might have cut out.
Here. No, it sounded like I did for a second, but I hear you now.
Okay.
The
Cope, you still with us?
society is complicated and totally depressing. I agree.
Yeah, I'm still here, Clay.
Yeah. It looks like we're definitely on the same wavelength over here with avian flu. So and like we can move past that, but I mean, like thinking about like individuals, right? Like things that happen in our life are going to inherently give us some sort of confirmation bias towards future events. Like obviously, if if I was raised Catholic, right, and like I was abused by a Catholic priest, then most likely, if I'm starting to pigeonhole Christianity and I want to point to, like things that I feel are wrong with different religions, then I'm probably going to have a confirmation bias towards Catholic priests, for example. So if you wanted to I feel like the confirmation bias is kind of like what leads to like ask these questions in the first place in a lot of instances. Like if I'm not someone that went through that situation, I probably don't really have any reason to go and like take collective data of all the Catholic priests. So whatever statistics are what we're using to like back up our arguments, and the fact that it's even an argument in the first place and we're trying to like force our opinion or prove or disprove something to someone else, I just feel like we're fundamentally getting away from finding our own truth. And I think that's really what most of life's about, and trying to figure out how to live with ourselves and determine how we want to be. Why are we, as like a society, making that about other people?
I don't know. Well, I think
It's
that
like,
I go for it, Dflo.
I think that maybe there's a majority or an element of society that makes it that way, but there's plenty of us that don't really see it that way. And so I think that's true, but then there's also a lot of different like subsets in our culture that just ignore that stuff and have their own set of beliefs that, they're functioning in a different way. I mean, including here.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I mean, we have a lot of like-minded individuals here, and it's almost to the point where like I'm kind of like more surprised whenever we like get into like discussions about these types of things with people that don't really see things the same way at this point. But I mean, it's not like it's not like so rare that it doesn't happen. But what are you thinking, Cope?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is I think that it's part of the building of the social norms. Like I was saying, the human condition. Like we are still, as much as we may do some of these negative things, we're all just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Because like the long and short is, we don't know what's going on. We're trying to figure it out, but we don't know. And part of that is trying to figure out, where we're at, what we're doing, and what everyone else is doing. And I think that part of what we're discussing here is um, the creation of the social norms and that kind of like, the status quo, if you will, and these kinds of things. So we're trying to establish these boundaries and, like you said, making the pigeonholes. And the thing is that these things can be useful. Like, when you're looking at it scientifically speaking, that is, it can be useful to define, what it is that you want, what you're after. Like, and on a far more simple situation, if you've got like a punnet of like strawberries in front of you, and you've got like a pile of salt, you may lean towards one or the other because, depending on what you like. And it's due to the fact that you have had particular experiences or whatever it is. You've created these schemas that are useful for you to make these decisions. Now, at the same time, again, I'm going to be sounding like a fence sitter. These things can, at extremes, can be a hazard if you start using them incorrectly. At the same time, if you don't use them at all, it can also be an issue because you spend far too much time, like cognitive energy, trying to define each of these things so individually that you don't actually make any progress in progress forward in your life. So there is a balance here, I think, that needs to be struck to be able to utilize the construct properly. But yeah, I think the long and short of what it comes down to, it's just part of like the social norms that are being created. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's the social norms, and then I think there's weird subsets of other social norms like within all of that. But I think maybe the meta confirmation bias thing is like society is fucked up and I'm really mad about it. And you can get in a loop about that even. So I guess what this is just making me think about, but I've had kind of a weird day of like encountering strange conflicts. So that what it's making me think about is just like not to have that type of confirmation bias too, where everywhere around you it just looks like, people are toxic or like, bad things are happening um from the social rules or social norms standpoint, but that you're actually seeing social norms everywhere you go and you're kind of missing the things that are slipping through the cracks of that and underemphasizing them because you're paying too much attention to, if that makes sense. Like, and I'm saying that because I think I do that sometimes. Like, I'll pay too much attention to what's broken, and I miss out miss out on noticing what's working and where things are flourishing and where there's places where people are like that messaging that we're sort of taught. But also, I think even more tricky and difficult is something that I see a lot at in the steemit world is how do we, share space others who really don't share a worldview with us or might be subscribing to different social norms than we are. And like, how do you hold both of those things in your mind? Or how do you get along with people who are like stuck in the mainstream social norms? And I don't know, to me, like the tension and all those things is how I cope with it all. And I want to manifest around myself, like the ability to engage with various things and not get stuck in any one mindset. Even the mindset of like everything's broken and we're all doomed, which is one that I feel like maybe I would be lying if I didn't say like, yeah, I feel that way like a lot. But it's like, yeah. But it's good to try to notice the other stuff too, I guess, so that you don't get in a rut.
I can say I strongly agree with that. I mean, I the concept of like law of attraction is something that like I do believe in. Now I think it's kind of like maybe like over dramatized and things like The Secret, and I feel like like whenever they try to like tell people that the law of attraction is like some big like magical, secret, right? That like people don't know. I mean, I think your perspective and how you look at the world definitely shapes and contributes to your reality. So, like,
Yes.
if we're always going around and we're like looking for these negative things, if we're looking for people to be toxic, then for sure we're gonna find them. I mean, if we look at everyone as people and kind of give them all the benefit of the doubt, I think in the same way that we can manifest obviously like negative experiences, we can manifest something different, and a lot of times I think that's positive, but I mean, positive and negative are just really all kind of subjective to me because like what's positive for me might be negative for someone else or vice versa. So while I do like believe in the law of attraction and manifesting our own reality, I don't know if I view it exactly the same way as it's intended or it sounds like it's described by other people. But
I like, oh, sorry.
I was
I
just
like
gonna. I mean,
thinking
I know what you're talking about. I mean, it makes sense to me.
about it more like the unconscious mind is good at picking things out and you can put it to work for you. So it's really good at protecting you from danger, for instance. So if you're keyed up for danger, like social dangers, like these people are toxic or that social paradigm is completely bad for me, and you're really keyed up for that, your unconscious mind is going to look for that in order to protect you. But you can
Mhm.
actually put your unconscious mind to work. And a friend of mine told me about this. I think he was an artist, Andre Breton, I think was his name, a French philosopher maybe, and he called the unconscious mind like a pacing tiger, and it's just like looking for stuff to hunt down, basically, is like the image. And it's not like Garfield though. See Garfield. um, and it's like looking for things to do, and you can actually use that to your benefit. And this friend of mine, she taught me this really fun like art activity where you like with a group of people, you can like pour a bunch of Crayola like crayons on the floor, and then everybody takes one and you go for a walk. And she calls it walk on color. Go on your walk and you look for things that match the color of your crayon. And you're just walking around, and then eventually you're going to find something that strikes you. Like you find something that's the color of your crayon. You're supposed to stop there and then use that as inspiration to write a poem, like whatever thing that you find. So maybe it's a flower, maybe it's like something on a sign. Anyways, it's just this really fun creative activity. But the activity also teaches you about the powers of your unconscious mind, because once you give it that job, you start seeing that color everywhere, and it's really fun. So I was going with that. Oh, but that's how I feel about like the idea of manifesting things. It's more like, training your mind to pick out the things that you really want to surround yourself with.
Right. I think part of the problem too is just allowing ourselves to believe that things are possible, right? I think basically, like, I can say, at least in my experience, the way I was raised and the way I lived my life previously, it was more or less about telling myself, like, all the reasons why I couldn't do something or something wasn't realistic, right? But, like once I remove a lot of that toxic mindset and I stop thinking, why. Like, it's very simple too. You just change why to why not, you know? Like, well, I could, never be in a healthy relationship because, like, something that happened in my past, right? Well, change that to, well, why not? Like, I can learn from the things that happened in my past and I can make sure to not repeat the cycles because I'm aware of them. So it's like being able to like shift that mindset about the way like we think about things, and like even other people. If I always like look at other people and say, well, like they're not so and so, or they're different than me, or they're not exactly like what I think like I normally want for like friends or like romantic attachments, things like that. I think the less limiting we are actually opens us up to more experiences and the possibility that what I ultimately come to is we don't really know what we want. We have ideas where we think we know what we want, and the more sure we are that we think we know what we want, the less likely we are to ever actually find it. It's like whenever we get things that we think we want, or like we're so sure that we convince ourselves that we have to be happy, that ultimately whenever we get them, if we do ever get them, then we ultimately just find out that they don't really satisfy us, and then we're ultimately like moving on to something else. So it's like if we can break down those expectations and assumptions of other people, and we can figure out that it's really not about anyone else, it's about us and adjusting our own mindset. I think it kind of like opens us up to so many more possibilities, and that's when you can really start seeing things like law of attraction taking place. I think it's kind of similar to what you were saying, like the color
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah, and you also start to see things for what they really are, I think. I don't know. Like the more I open myself to experiences with other people, to this like idea of attachment or these other things, but I'm also the more I realize like I don't actually know what I want and I don't know what's going to happen in this scenario and like I don't even know what, like you say you go to a party and you don't know anybody there. But if you open yourself up to the experience, you might learn something about yourself or might just be something totally surprising to you where if and give you something. What am I trying to say? Like you might expect one thing to happen, but another thing happens. And unless you open your mind to any possibility, you won't even be able to see or receive whatever thing that you could learn from that situation because you're not like open to any possibilities. You're just like have this one definition of like, oh, well, that kind of person, like I don't like artists. And so that's an artist, never mind. But like if you're just like, oh, curious, like I wonder what this person has to say, like you might hear something total that totally is new to you and learn something just because you decided to be open the
Right.
direction that you want. But anyway, so you're manifesting things, but then sometimes you're creating a reality that's also can be like a delightful surprise because you're able to more be open to what things are too. Like, oh, this person was really only going to be in my life like really temporarily, but that really taught me X, Y, and Z. And now I feel like I'm ready for the next thing, So and definition in your mind, like relationships are supposed to go like this, like first this, then that, then that. Like then you're closing yourself off to the thing that you might have gotten from that situation.
Another thing that I tend to find as well with that is the concept that you have of something when you actually attain it is considerably different. And that can be like our own expectations. It can be the social norms that tell us, what's what and that kind of thing. But, you know, it's okay. So an example that I would give is like your general milestone. So in Australia, hitting 18 means you can drink, right? So it means you're technically an adult. So this whole time, as you're leading up to the age of 18, it's like, oh, when you get 18, you get to be 18, you're going to make your own decision, you're going to be an adult. And then you actually get there and you're expecting like this light switch to flick and everything's going to be different. All of a sudden, you're going to be an adult. And then you get there and it doesn't happen. And then, okay, the next one's 21. So you hit 21 and everything's going to change then, right? And then you do, and then nothing happens. Then when you get married and you have kids and so on and so forth. And every time you hit those milestones, nothing changes. And I don't mean that nothing changes. I mean, it's just, it is not what it's made out to be. And that is part of like the disappointment of life as you get there. And it can be us kind of like tricking ourselves into thinking there's always going to be something else that's going to make it for us. So whether it's the next job or whether it's the next house that you buy or the next car that you're going to get, we are continually hunting for that feeling of completion when ultimately it's not designed like that. That's not how we feel complete. Does that make sense?
Well,
Yeah.
the present moment
Entirely.
is the place completion is in the moment.
Yeah. It's like the living of the life is what is that feeling, but we so like attach these emotions and these feelings, this sense of achievement to these material things, possessions or milestones, if you will, that have no relevance to that feeling of completion. It's actually within us the whole time. It's the journey that is what makes us feel that way. But we kind of like tend to put that aside. And this is, again, due to social norms and these kinds of things. We are consistently being told what it is that makes us complete. So whether it's the house on the hill, the picket fences, vanilla skies, and all that kind of thing, and then you get there and it's not what you wanted.
This kind of like reminds me of something. Like I think a lot of times, whenever we get into that mindset of, like always looking for something external to, like change our experience or complete us or whatever, like you're saying, we kind of get into like that now or never mindset, right? Like either things have to happen the way I want them to now, or they're never going to happen. But I think that's actually not how time works at all, right? Like, never isn't really an experience. And while some things may quote unquote never happen, it's not really relevant because like in my mind it's always either now or not right now. But the only thing that I can really control or focus on is now. That doesn't mean I can't have goals. It doesn't mean I can't have like a direction in my life. But ultimately, like focusing too heavily on things that aren't currently, like in my life just pretty much pushes me into a situation where I'm missing life and I'm always it's kind of like a self-perpetuating cycle, right? Like you're still looking for something external, like what Cope was saying. But now, if we can be completely fine with right now, then we don't really have to so much worry about what happens in 6 months from now or a year from now, because it's always now. Even if it's 6 months from now, it's still now, because the only time I'm ever going to experience 6 months from now is when it's now.
Hmm.
Right, and I think that's, like, a really good reminder thing to bring yourself to, especially if you're feeling stressed or worried about something. I think there's something to be said for I mean, there's just times in life too where it's just kinda miserable and the moment really sucks, but, like, it's still really good to just try to really live that moment the best you can because, you really I mean, everyone says that cliche of, like, you don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow, but it's also like, "Oh, you don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow," like, something awesome could happen tomorrow, so trying to embrace every moment the best you can, even when it's, like, not ideal,
Hmm.
um, seems like
Yeah.
the best way to live, and just being, like, open to the fact that sometimes too, but, like, just finding some kind of kernel of something in that moment, even if it's just, like, the comfort of a cup of tea, you know? Like, just being able to get something from it.
Yeah,
Um
well, that's what I find as well. It's like even in like the most negative situations, if you can learn something from that, then it's not a complete sort of like waste of time or a loss or the big terrible thing that you think that it is because you've gained something, you've learned something. And I think if we apply that kind of like mentality to these things, we start seeing the dynamic that comes before us, and that is essentially that we can't have one without the other. Like, how can we know what happiness is without feeling sadness? They kind of like come as a package deal because you don't know one without knowing the other. And I don't know, I take some solace in that kind of like that knowledge of just going like, yeah, well, you know what? I'm feeling sad right now, and I can accept that, and I know why, and I can learn something from it. But at some point, this is going to pass, and there is going to be happiness. There's going to be that kind of feeling, and the reason why I know that is because I'm feeling this way now. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I'll take yeah. It's like my self comforting way of doing things. I don't know. Maybe that can help somebody out there that's going through the same kind of thing.
You know,
Sometimes it gets tricky to be like, if you can only accept what's happening right now, then you'll be happy. You almost get in the same loop of if you could only buy that amazing house, then you'll be happy. So it's always good to remember too, like as accepting the present moment doesn't mean that you'll just immediately feel happy, but there's some sort of sense of fulfillment that comes with doing that, even when things are really hard, and just accepting the present and yeah, knowing that things change can really help you get through it and healing to me, even when I'm going through like hell and I don't want to experience that.
one of the things that I feel like is fundamental to maintaining a state of like acceptance of the present, like that being okay, that whole perspective is we have to kind of like get rid of the fear of the unknown, right? And I think that's something that is definitely like inherently instilled into us from society, right? Like assuming the worst case scenario or like bad outcomes, like especially like whenever it comes to something like death, right? Like we can be taught that we go to hell for doing bad things, or even if we're like we take like a more atheist perspective on it and we just basically believe we die and it's over, we still kind of like go through life with some idea that we don't know what happens when we die, right? But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. And this is why I say this, because nothing isn't an experience. So if I die and there's nothing, then it's irrelevant to me because nothing doesn't care about nothing. You know, like I'm saying, like there's nothing to fear if it's just nothing. Now we can kind of like let ourselves believe in like the whole heaven and hell philosophy. Like I'm gonna be punished for having, like a bad life or not doing things a certain way. And I feel like we live our lives in fear of like some kind of future punishment. But like if we can let go of like the whole fear of the unknown, and I think a lot of that is related to fear of death, then we can be more open to basically like receiving new things, right? Like whenever we're fearing the unknown, we're saying we don't like change, but change is the only constant. So at some point, if we don't like how things are going and we want change, but we're afraid of change, then we're more inclined to keep doing things that we don't like because it's comfortable. Like it's kind of like we become numb. So whenever we're like in that state of just like perpetuating our own toxic existence for the sake of not having to deal with something that we don't know what's going to happen, then we essentially close ourselves off to allowing new things to happen, or we're at least resistant to them. Now, obviously, the universe doesn't really give a fuck if we want to just completely shut off and not be acceptant or willing to try new things, right? We might get that for a while. We might be able to like force ourselves into isolation, but like eventually somebody might come knocking on the door, and I mean, we can hide and try not to answer the door. Maybe we get away with it for a while, but I mean, like I'm pretty sure, like even if we manage to like force ourselves into the most isolated state we can be, we still have like no control over whether or not something from like some kind of external force acts on us. But being receptive to these things and like having that positive mindset definitely affects all of our interactions. And we're kind of like circling back to the law of attraction idea here, right? But like let's say a stranger knocks on my door right now. I'm not gonna assume it's the worst case scenario. I'm probably gonna go look out the window and see. I mean, if they're not like wearing a black ski mask and holding a gun, like I'll probably just open the door and be like, "What's up?" But like we live in a society with like all these statistics and all these expectations that like bad things happen, and I feel like we kind of like close ourselves off from like the joy of actually just living and experiencing new things.
Mm. And yeah,
In a
just with what
general
you're saying
way,
with
but
the whole statistics situation, yeah, it's the thing is like statistics are useful, and again, we're going back to the whole pigeonholing and that kind of thing. They are useful to a degree, but it's kind of like the way that we apply them. And I'm going to throw up a little thing here in the chat to kind of like make a bit more sense. This is Bill Burr's take on stats, and I think this is an accurate sort of like portrayal of the situation of stats with the layperson utilizing stats. I mean, those that are sort of like on the scientific level kind of thing, where they kind of understand that stats only mean so much and don't take any more than that face value. That's one thing. But for the lay people, I think that's kind of like an accurate description of how stats are applied.
Okay.
yeah, and it's used in marketing and stuff too, like to sell products or to sell pharmaceutical drugs, or you could go on and on about how statistics are misused for biased reasons.
Yeah. And I think like part of this as
Never
well
all you
is
can ever yeah, all you can ever do with statistics go, "Hmm, I saw this interesting data set. It
yeah,
might suggest this thing, but it might not."
yeah.
We don't
Well,
know.
it's good as a rough guide, so you can kind of like, and like I said, it's something that you can utilize to help you in your day to day life kind of thing. But part of this situation, which is what Clay was saying a little bit before, is just having the awareness of these kinds of things. So similarly, like rolling back onto the confirmation bias thing. Like once you understand what confirmation bias is, how it works, where it's applied for different kinds of people, you can turn around and start looking at how it affects you. So essentially, when you start doing these things, you can, because you are aware of that situation, you can step into it and go like, okay, I'm starting to, I'm being triggered, or I'm reacting, or I'm feeling a certain kind of thing. Let's take a step back and let's have a look at the concept of, insert concept. So in this situation, confirmation bias. Now let's see how this applies to me right here and now. And you can separate, at least somewhat separate between the subjective and the objective, and have that understanding moving forward. And it's the same thing with the statistics. Like you can, if you have that concept of how it works, how it's applied, the strengths and weaknesses of the construct, you can, when you're confronted with it, you can take that step back from the situation, apply your knowledge and go, okay, this is how it is affecting me. And I am a human just like everyone else. So confirmation bias will affect me. It will affect everyone else. This is how it is affecting me. And I can make my decision moving forward from here, knowing that I have X amount of confirmation bias. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, what were you gonna say, Dflo?
Oh, I don't remember because these memes, they're they're
Yeah.
erasing my brain.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, what if? But I really like them, but what was the one that was really funny? Oh, the one about invisibility, but also we were talking about the never-ending story in chat. But like, what about people who are just totally like their confirmation bias is only like of their own head? And they're like impervious to any other input. So it's like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just thinking about all the different ways that you could have confirmation bias. Like my anxiety does that to me, where I'm like super anxious and I get like a loop in my head of like some weird set of things that I think are happening or something. You know what I mean? And then like you're just confirming your own loop over and over again rather than like this external information like anyone, like all people walking around at night are going to mug me.
Well,
That's probably a thought that I've had many times. And yes, if somebody knocked on my door right now, I would not answer it.
I mean, what if, like, here's a hypothetical for you, right? Like, what if somebody just got in a wreck, like, on the street in front of your house, and they needed to use the phone to call the ambulance, right? Like, not everybody that comes and knocks on your door at night is necessarily intending you harm, right? Like my thought would generally be, if somebody intends me harm, they're probably not gonna knock, right? Like, they would just break a window or, like, sneak in. So I mean, in general, I mean, I think it's at least worth, like, glancing out and kind of like assessing the situation. Now, obviously, my confirmation bias is I'm 6'3", and unless you have like a gun in your hand, I don't think you're gonna probably hurt me very badly. Like I'm not really worried about somebody beating me up with like their fist or something. Now, obviously, that might be a very different situation with you, and like I have to assess my own confirmation bias when I say something like that, right? Like obviously, like you're a smaller woman, so like if you open the door and there's like obviously somebody much larger than you out there, I mean it's a different set of like emotions and physical response that you have to have in that situation. I mean,
And
I think part of that's just
usually most
survival.
people are bigger than me. Statistically speaking, the chances of somebody being bigger than me when I open the door are 80%. I just made up a statistic.
Right, but I mean, like I know you have like a teenage son, right? So I mean, like odds are, if you open the door and like somebody takes a swing at you and like he hears it, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's gonna come and help you out or something, right? So I mean, like there's all kinds of different dynamics at play, and I mean, I think this is a prime example of why we're all unique, and I don't really like to go with statistics to like base my assessments of situations, right? Because I mean, like, the situation could easily be reversed, right? Like, you could be like a female MMA fighter, and somebody like, knock on your back door, and they think they're just gonna like bum rush you and come in and like steal all your stuff. But then, like, you open the door, and they make a move, and you just like put them in a headlock or something and hold them there until the police get there. So, I think whenever we like get into like looking at all these statistics, it's very what's the right word I'm looking for here? It kind of like it's all based on assumptions and expectations, right? Like we expect more likely that there's going to be more African American on African American crimes, right? We expect these things, and that's like why we're looking to things like statistics to support our beliefs. But the question and like the fundamental way that like I try to exist is like I ask myself, well, why do I have this belief? And I mean, if the only reason that I really have this belief is because that's what I'm told, like it's not firsthand experience, then I think like, maybe it's worth like keeping in mind whenever I go into situations that, like these stereotypes and these statistics exist. But I don't think I should like go into every situation expecting that like, if I'm walking through a predominantly African American neighborhood that I'm gonna get assaulted or mugged. Like I think that's a really ridiculous way to live our lives. I mean that's essentially, I mean, obviously it's stereotyping people, but I mean, I feel like that's inherently only seeing the bad. Like, it doesn't even give people a chance to prove that they are good people. You know what I mean? It doesn't. If you're automatically looking for the worst in people and assuming the worst in people, that's probably what you're gonna get.
Agreed.
What you think, Cope? Do you go around assuming the worst in everyone?
No, I generally tend to try, and again, yeah, we all try. I try and be as neutral as possible until the situation presents itself as what it is, and whether it complies with a stereotype or it does not, uh, yeah, it is what it is. But I try to let things play out.
Right. And I mean, obviously, we get into confirmation bias again, right? Like, if in the past you were, like, mugged and, like, like robbed at gunpoint, assaulted or something by an African American male while walking through a bad neighborhood, then obviously you're going to be looking for that to happen again, right? Like, you're going to be predispositioned to assume the worst in that situation because you've already been through it. But I think like we have to be able to look at people much more subjectively than that and say, look, at the base level, we should be able to at least agree that we're all human. And I like to assume that we're all just doing the best we can, right? Like maybe somebody's best they can is really like robbing me to like feed their family one day, right? Or like maybe it's even worse than that. Like maybe they're robbing me because they think they have to have like like some kind of like nice shoes or something, and that the only way to get that is to go around robbing people. I'm not gonna like take that personally and say like everyone's out to get me. I'm not gonna assume that like everyone that looks like them is willing to do the same thing.
Hmm.
And
But would you sort of like agree that when you're looking at these situations, if you have observed a particular pattern and you see the pattern coming forward again, that and technically that's using the stats as well because you've had X amount of things happen prior, so you're seeing the same pattern emerge. Like let's just say we're looking at a person, are they toxic or not, something like that to me. If you are interacting with this person and you have given them the opportunity, you haven't just automatically judged them as being a toxic person. You've given them the opportunity. And as you see the traits come forward that you have statistically sort of like mapped onto, okay, somebody that does this kind of stuff is going to end up or has in the past done negative things or toxic things to me. Therefore, at a particular point, you draw the line and say, I'm no longer going to interact with this person. Uh, do you kind of like see that as like an effective use of statistics blending with the subjectivity of humanity appropriately, or do you still think that that's not a good way to do it?
Well, I mean, I think if you're talking about as one individual, if like looking at things like patterns and accepting toxic behavior as, like indicative of, like self-perpetuating cycles, and I think we have to address individuals as an individual at that point, right? Like, let's say every time I get into a relationship, with a woman that, like, let's say every time I get into a relationship with a woman, she cheats on me, right? So either I'm gonna have to start going for men, or I'm assuming every woman's gonna cheat on me. I feel like that's inherently a negative way to go into a relationship, right? Now, if I take it as that individual cheats on me, am I going to be considering them more likely to do it again? You know, I mean, I think that's something you have to kind of like take on a very subjective basis, right? Like, what led to the situation? Does the person have like any kind of remorse? I mean, like, I don't view relationships as like necessarily like I don't think we own people, right? So like even if say like I was married to someone, like if I'm married to a woman and she goes out and cheats, well, I mean I think that's completely her right, but it's also entirely my right to say, okay, well, I'm divorcing you, or if if like if I'm married to someone and they decide they want a divorce, well, I don't think you're my property. And if I think we have a strong enough relationship that I might want to, like try to talk to you about it and like determine that maybe we shouldn't do that. I mean, like I might share my perspective, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think I think looking at people and generalizing other people based on our experiences with them is just kind of like overall a negative thing, right? Like I shouldn't assume every woman's gonna cheat on me. Like just like if you are a woman and you are in like an abusive relationship, right? I don't think you should assume every man's gonna try to like be abusive towards you. If you were in a relationship with a woman and she was like emotionally manipulative, I don't think you should assume that every woman's going to be emotionally manipulative. But I mean, I
There
think,
is something to be said for like calling attention to your own patterns that cause you to possibly situations. Like if you get into them over and over again, then you do need to go, yeah, it's probably not every woman in the world is going to cheat on you, but what am I doing that I keep meeting people and becoming attracted to them, and they're the type of person that would be dishonest with me in this way? Like how does that, I don't understand those patterns necessarily myself, but it does seem like some people do get in those patterns, but yeah, they can't use that pattern to then make a generalization about a whole set of people. It's like a dynamic, or like it's happening, but it doesn't, you can't draw the conclusion that all people are bad because that pattern happens.
well, no, and I agree entirely. Exactly what you just said, right? I would look at myself and I would say, what am I doing to keep perpetuating this cycle, right? Like I'm not gonna look at another person and say, what are you doing that makes me keep perpetuating this cycle? Like obviously I'm missing some kind of like warning signs when I get into a relationship if every woman's cheating on me. Like obviously I'm either going for women that have very different views on relationships than I am, or like there should be something that I can like assess within myself, and maybe it's communication, right? Like maybe we're not having effective communication and like discussing these issues before they come up. So, I'm not going to put that on the other person though. And I think that's what a lot of this stuff, like whenever I talk about like getting into statistics and stereotyping other people, it's externalizing our own problems. and like looking for the world to adjust in some way to accommodate us. But really, it's the other way around. Like, that's not how the world works. We have to look at ourselves, adjust ourselves, and, fix whatever's internal before we go out and interact with others.
Yeah, and that's all in flux all the time too. I mean, like you work on whatever things about yourself and you try to be aware of your own patterns. But then with each new encounter and each new person, it's almost like there's a little bit of a clean slate too, where you have to saying you're kind of a slightly different person. So there's always just this, right? There's always just this like unknown thing where you're kind of control for part of it, which is you. But there's always the way that other people influence you or just the new situations that you end up getting in. What on earth? This is like meme Bill.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree, right? Like, if I go into a relationship with the assumption and the expectation of myself that I can't be in a healthy relationship and I always end up cheating on my partner, then I'm gonna always have that expectation of myself, right? Like, even if it doesn't happen right away, I'm gonna always look at like when someone's flirting with me, this could be the next thing, and it's like almost like I expect failure, right? It's kind of like self-sabotaging in a way. It's like and I feel like this is the same way when we look at other people with like these jaded perspectives. If I'm always thinking that I'm going to get into a relationship with a woman and she's going to cheat on me, then I'm basically expecting it to happen. Like, I'm waiting for it to happen. I'm always looking for it to happen. And I think what happens is we see what we want to see, right? Like, I obviously know we can be completely oblivious to things if we don't want to see them. We can have people telling us that someone's, being abusive or emotionally manipulative, and we're just letting it happen. We can even reject our friends that are trying to warn us that we're doing these things. And I think part of that is we're just not paying enough attention to ourselves. And like, if we know something's wrong, I think it's entirely up to us to be honest and say something about it, right? Now, I mean, obviously, there's other dynamics where, like, you can feel threatened, like, you can't just, like, address the problem. But, I mean, I think if you're in one of those situations, it's ultimately about you to get out of that situation because you can't depend on the other person to do it for you. I mean,
Yeah.
like if somebody's beating you every night and telling you that if you tell anyone, they're going to kill you, are you really looking to that person to stop doing this at some point so that you can get out of the situation? Because to me, like, that's kind of mind blowing, right? Like, I would say that's not how the world works. You don't look at the aggressor and wait for them to stop. Like, you take a defensive action and you remove yourself from the situation.
But there are psychological constructs, that
Mhm.
that influence that. I mean, like you got Stockholm syndrome, which is like one of the most known ones, where essentially you are attached to those that are essentially doing you harm, and this translates a lot to these kinds of things as well. And when we take that into consideration, it's kind of like for someone who is on the outside observing, we see a lot more things than the person who is in the situation and going through the situation themselves. And and this is like one of the classics is like the person who's in like the worst relationship, whatever, like that of, and they give out pretty solid relationship advice, just because when they are observing other people, they can make considerably good judgments based on their observations and these kinds of things. But when it comes to them doing it for themselves, they suck hard because they can't actually do that the same thing for themselves, because when you're in the situation, it's completely different.
I will definitely say I see a lot of truth in what you're saying here. And I'll tell you something I do personally is I listen to how people talk about other people, right? If you
Hmm.
listen to, and this kind of relates to like what you're saying about giving advice. If you listen to how people talk about other people and like how they assess how other people do things, it tells you a lot more about them than it actually does about the other person. So, like, I'm not a person that really, like, engages in gossip much, but, like, whenever you hear somebody gossiping about someone else, you can usually take what they're saying and in some way relate it to what they're actually trying to tell you about themselves. Now, obviously, it can mean different things and it can be interpreted very differently, but I think it's almost always, in my experience, very telling how we talk about others is how we actually view ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's it's an accurate assessment. Like, what do you reckon?
I get distracted in the chat because we're talking about fluoride.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I
fuck
agree,
fluoride.
probably.
Mm.
No, I
I
think
guess.
I think you were saying like when we're coming up with these like opinions about other people, we're usually projecting something about ourselves, right?
Oh, right. Like, I mean, you can even see it from like positive aspects in relationships, right? Like, okay, hypothetically, let's say the two of us are in a relationship, and like I'm telling you like how kind I think you are, like what an amazing person I think you are, and like all of these things, and you're telling the same things back to me. It's kind of like we're reflecting how the other person makes us feel. And now, if you take that and you look at it into a situation with like gossip, like let's say me and you are having a conversation, and I'm telling you that like I think Cope's 100% fake. I think everything that comes out of his mouth is just like some kind of subversive lie, and I think like he's trying to like manipulate you in some kind of way. Now, what that's really doing is probably telling you that I'm trying to turn you against Cope, and I may or may not have an agenda for why I want to do that. Now, if I think that you're like such a great person and you're like so amazing, I'm pretty sure you could figure out for yourself how you want to interact with Cope, right? But I think a lot of times, especially like when we're in like unhealthy relationships and we're not being very self-aware, you're like self-reflective and trying to figure out these things for ourselves, and we're like looking to other people to validate our opinions. I think that's how we get into these situations where we get manipulated and we let people control us. And just throwing this out there for avian flu, fuck fluoride.
Uh, My son's teeth were really bad when he was little, and we don't have fluoridated water here in Montana. And so I think a lot of kids, they say that they think that's why a lot of kids get cavities here. So they give the kids like fluoride tablets, which I didn't do with my son. And I nursed him for a really long time and stuff. And he was like a really healthy kid and all that. But his teeth were like terrible. Now they're perfect. He doesn't have any problems, but his little baby teeth kept rotting. Yeah, I don't even remember what I was gonna say. Oh, but I don't think it was fluoride or anything like that. I think it was just like he had genetically like even the dentist said that. Like he had genetically soft baby teeth. And so
Oh,
they were just kind of like dissolving. But people like to blame, oh,
mm,
you need fluoride. But yeah, I think fluoride is
mm.
disgusting too.
I
And
think
I've
there's
avoided it for him and for me his whole life.
another interesting thing as well. If you look at cultures where the Western world hasn't infiltrated yet, they're still technically untouched, and they're primitive. Air quotes primitive when you look at the cultures. But their teeth are bloody perfect. They don't get the kind of issues that we do. And then you go, well, do they have fluoride in the water? No, they don't. They have natural resources for water and that kind of thing. So, okay, no worries. So essentially what we're looking at here is our diet and our intake, which is provided by, you got FDA approval, blah, 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 those kinds of things. You got companies designing foods for us that put mass amounts of sugars and mass amount of these things that are having an effect on us. And now we need fluoride in the water to prevent It's kind of like they're causing an issue, they're providing a solution to that issue, which isn't really that good anyway, and we're told that it's for our own good. Where essentially, if we remove these kinds of chemicals, or just call them chemicals, just as a blanket term, from our foods and things like that, then we wouldn't have the issues of having cavities and all these things in the first place, and we wouldn't need the fluoride in the water. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the water here, even though it doesn't have fluoride, it's treated water, so it has other stuff like chlorine in it. Like sometimes I can smell the chlorine in my tap water. And I used to always filter it. I had one of those little tower filters, but the thing inside of it is like $70 and I haven't been able to afford it for like a year. So I was just drinking tap water. I was just like, oh, well, other people drink tap water. I should quit being so picky. And I sort of talked myself out of being so picky that I needed this like filtered water. And talking to sound waves one day about my joint pain. And he was like, quit drinking tap water right now. And so I did, because I was in so much pain. Like I just kept like laying in bed all the time, just aching. And I switched to filtered. I just have been buying the Culligan filtered water for now because I can slowly afford that rather than a big filter thing. And it changed everything for me. I don't have the same joint pain at all. Like my hands were hurting, were hurting, and nothing helped. Like taking ibuprofen didn't help. Nothing. So I thought that was pretty profound that that bad. I don't know. It just makes you really think about the state of like everyone around you who isn't making that change and how they must kind of feel really crappy half the time and they don't even know why.
I think this is just one of those things that goes to show like how entirely dynamic our conversations usually get. Because like we were just talking about interacting with people in abusive relationships and things, and now we're talking about water.
Yeah.
But
It's got that organic flow.
yeah,
So
but
like,
and this is making me think of I've been wanting to create like build my own water filter, and you can totally build them yourself, like a reverse osmosis water filter where you just like run tap water into it and it charges the water, like ionizes it and does reverse osmosis. Like you can buy them obviously too, but like buying them's like $1,000+ or you can just like build one yourself for, like whatever you can find the parts and put it together. But yeah, that's definitely something that like I want to do personally. But like looking and see, like this is something I find fascinating, right? Like how much of like our society views are like really influenced by something like the fact that we have unhealthy drinking water. Like how many people are miserable going to work every day and like doing it in pain because like we literally have toxic drinking water that the government regulates.
mm-hmm.
I mean, literally, it really makes me think about that because if you're feeling so shitty on your weekends that you're just sitting around in pain and you're not doing things that you like, and then all you do is work, feel kind of, it wasn't the kind of pain that totally incapacitated me, but just low level pain all the time just wears you out. So you just lose your motivation. So yes, it does make me think a lot about, and anytime anybody says to me, any kind of body aches, I'm like, quit drinking tap water.
Mm.
Just stop drinking tap water. It changed in like a week. I felt so much better. So I was just being poisoned every day. And I don't use aluminum and I'm really picky about plastic. I try to keep that away from my food. That's really hard, especially just needing things to be convenient sometimes. But I am pretty picky, so I eat pretty healthy and natural food and me that like wow, I was just poisoning myself like that whole time. It's
Mm.
just yeah. And
Well,
how is that for everyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing like how many ways we. I mean, like these are even like beyond like the ways that we like passively, psychologically, like mentally, spiritually damage ourselves. Like just looking at like a lot of the things like this with society and how it operates. Like how many things we adopt that are probably actually horrible for us, but like we're told they're good for us, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
scientifically told, right? Scientifically.
right, and see, like this is where we get into statistics, right? Like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend, like I mean,
Yeah.
thanks for pulling up these bullshit statistics and convincing me that I should be poisoning myself with fluoride my whole life, like thanks.
hmm hmm and again, it's another kind of like reflection on like my standpoint on scientism and that kind of thing, where we just have that blind faith towards science. And like, yeah, science knows and they prove everything, which they prove nothing really, but they prove everything,
Ignorant
everything.
way
Blah
to
blah
look
blah.
at science.
Yeah.
It's like an ignorant way to see science if you think that science is proving things, because for the most part, they're just theorizing things.
Oh,
hmm
this is actually I want to say this ties back to like one of the first conversations I ever had with Cope.
mm
Fundamentally, science isn't about proving things. Science is about disproving them. And I think whenever people look to science to like have all the answers, I think you're inherently doing it wrong. Like you should be looking at science as a way to like test your theories and disprove them. And I think the same way as far as philosophy, right? Like we should always, like that's why I love having these discussions, right? Like I don't think my philosophy is impervious by any means. Like I'm putting it to the test every day. I
hmm
want you to prove me wrong on something or like make me question one of my beliefs, please. Like
hmm
that's invited. Like I would love to be a better person, and if you can make me question my own beliefs and make me become a better person, thank you for your service. But then like we see like society and like this culture of we were talking about it earlier, right? Social justice warrior, where we want to control how other people think and act, and we want them to all think and act like us. I'm like, that is like the worst thing I can imagine you doing, because what's worse than a whole bunch of everybody being the exact same way? Like to me, that would be like the most boring. What would be the point of living, right? Like everything would just be so it would all be expectations and assumptions.
Right. Yeah. And that's, curiosity is it's kind of like the same idea as opening yourself up to possibilities, like being curious what other people's opinions are. And even if you can't really agree with each other, at least you've other to listen better. I mean, it's just nice to be able to exchange ideas, even if the point isn't like somebody's opinion is going to be the true one or the one that wins. Clay.
Sorry, I had to throw that out there when you said there's plastic in your DNA. Well,
No,
no,
it's
but
appreciated and it's funny. I love how it's like I love the parallel conversations.
you know,
It's good.
I think like whenever we get into, and this ties back into confirmation bias again, right? Like, why does one have to be right or wrong? Like whenever we're this is just like mind blowing to me, right? Like if we're like looking at everybody that kills each other, and we're gonna break that down by ethnicity, and then we're gonna break that down further and say like, okay, well, how many were with automobiles? How many were being stabbed? I'm just like, you're missing the forest for the fucking trees here. Like, why are people stabbing and killing each other? Why are people shooting and killing each other? Like, let's address the problem. Focus on the fucking problem. Don't break down the problem into all these different subsects and never address it. It's just whenever we're like looking and we're breaking down into like all these different categories, it's like we're expecting to find things. We're expecting one race to have higher statistics on something. Like that's why statistics to me are just pretty much useless, and they're like almost like buzzwords to me, right? They're just ways to shore up your own beliefs. They don't leave any room for like learning something new. All they're doing is these are my statistics that I go to defend my position, and I'm not really receptive to hearing what you have to say because my statistics disprove you entirely. This is a waste of a discussion, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I see stats as like I still see them as being like useful in some sense. I don't think they're completely useless, but I think it's more along the lines of similarly to the discussion we had about the DSM and the fact that it is the way that it's utilized, the way that it's applied. I mean, the DSM is supposed to give you a rough guide. Like if someone turns up in front of you and is exhibiting X amount of symptoms, and you have no concept of what's going on, you can pull something out and flick a few pages and go, okay, they're doing this, they're doing that. It seems like they're around this mark, so we're going to start trying to see if this is what we should be dealing with. That can change and evolve depending on what happens from then onwards. But what a lot of people do with the DSM is they'll take something and go like, oh, that means that you are a schizophrenic and that you are nothing else but a schizophrenic. They give you a little label, they stick it on you, and you are now from now on given this label. And obviously that's the incorrect way of using it. But like I said, the purpose that I believe that stats and DSM and many other tools like this are designed for us, just to give us a bit of a general guide. If we have no concept of what's happening, we can kind of like get some kind of direction. But people tend to use it as like a soapbox to jump on and say, I'm right and you're wrong and you lose and I'm the winner.
Right. Like there's no better or worse than people killing each other in my perspective. like just because you can say that, like it's so and such more likely that an African American is going to do a crime against another African American, like that's telling me that you think it's either better or worse that that's happening and that you can pinpoint that, right? Like what is better or worse about that situation? Like it's still somebody, like doing a crime against another person. Like it's kind of like it's to me it's like irrelevant, right? Like whenever they're like here's part of what actually brought up like this whole like line of thought. Like should same sex couples be allowed to adopt or have children? I'm like, I think whenever you start looking at statistics, like children are, like whatever percent, like more or less likely to grow up homosexual when raised by homosexual parents. I think you're looking at something that really has nothing to do with the real questions and like the real problems we have as a society. Like in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter when we have so many people out there that are raising children that probably shouldn't be in the first place, right? Like what about abusive households? Are we saying that it's better for a child to be raised by heterosexual abusive parents than it is to just grow up in a loving homosexual family?
Mm.
This to me is like where I get into like this kind of mind blowing area. Like under what rationalization are we even having this discussion? And
Yeah.
I understand. Like it's up to me to be able to relate and have this conversation in a productive way with another person if I disagree with it. But I mean, like I feel like we're on different fucking planets if we're having a conversation about does being raised by homosexual parents negatively impact your life. Well, we have things like there are children starving. There are children being
Mm-hmm.
raised in orphanages and by CPS. There are
Mm-hmm.
children being
Mm-hmm.
abused and raped. Like
Mm-hmm.
what does this have to do with whether or not like a homosexual couple adopts a child? Like, what does this have to do with if an African American child or gets adopted by a white family or something like that? Like, I feel like we look at these statistics and we worry about the wrong fucking problems. Like, what we should really be worrying about is how to do the best we can and how to respect each other.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. But the thing that comes to mind, as in like, why is it like this, is again we're going to be delving into a bit of the conspiracy theory side of things. But like, they want us to have these arguments. They want us to have this, and true to form, they are meaningless. arguments. We should not be having these arguments. But if we were not having these arguments, we'd have much more time to focus on greater things like pointing out the issues of governments and protesting and going against those kinds of social norms there. And I think that that's kind of like the purpose of these things. In I've said this a few times over the past few weeks, but they have us fighting over breadcrumbs while they make away with the loaf. And I think that that's part of that system is find ways to divide us on these subjects that we really shouldn't even be discussing in the first place. It should be a no-brainer kind of thing, but attaching such emotional content behind us that we feud over these things while they do whatever they want.
Exactly. They want you missing the forest with the trees, right?
Yes.
They want you distracted. They want you divided. They want you segregated. They want you like looking at each other suspiciously, because what's the one fucking thing that threatens an oppressive society? People fucking finding common ground, respecting each other, loving each other, and working together to do something to fix the situation. Like that is the biggest fucking fear, right? Like, I mean, if you're in an oppressive society and the way you like make money and operate is by controlling and oppressing people, you don't want them to become aware of that. Do everything you can to distract them from that fact. Like that is your whole modus operandi. You want people to be fighting over stupid trivial bullshit so that they're not focused on the actual fact that you're basically enslaving them.
Yep, and we end up in that good old situation where it's the frog in the pot, just getting turned up nice and slow at a time before we know it, we're cooked.
Yeah, you don't just throw the frog into the boiling hot water. Let it build up over time. Keep, you know, it's mind blowing, right? And this gets into like something we were talking about last week, me and Mino, about like, could you go back into working, well, what me and him both call slave wage jobs after you stop doing it? And I'm like, I don't really think it's a question of whether or not it's possible. It's to me, it's a question of why would I? Like this isn't something that you can like become aware of and then just be like, whatever. Like this isn't like finding out that like there was like a little white lie, like whatever, like money isn't real, but like in general the system works and it's for your best interest. This is like finding out that fundamentally everything you've ever been told's a lie, and the entire system operates on basically keeping you stupid, fighting each other, and sucking the life out of you.
And that's part of the issue when it comes to dealing with that, like in real life. We were saying before about grabbing someone and saying, "Hey, don't you understand that you're being like manipulated?" Blah blah. The human condition has defense mechanisms for these things because it's such a revolution of thought. I mean, just imagine cognitive dissonance multiplied by every thought that you've ever had. That is mental breakdown situation. That is losing your mind situation. That is facilitating a suicidal thought. You know what I mean? It's just like, holy crap, everything you've thought was real is no longer real. I can't deal with this kind of crap anymore. So as humans, we're going to resist that change, like such a radical change, with everything that we've got, every fiber of our being. And that's kind of like why we have a lot of people just putting the blinders on and saying, no, I'm not going to look, no, and they're just sitting in the corner, covering their ears, singing la 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 la, so they can't hear the truth.
Well, yeah, because I mean, part of that process is admitting that you were duped, right? Like most people don't want to admit that they fell for it. Like your natural defense mechanism is to be like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like don't tell me I'm so stupid that I fell into the slavery trap. I'm saying you never really had any choice other than to do that because that's the way it's been for generations now. Like it's not your fault. It's not my fault. I'm not saying I'm better than you for being able to see this or anything. But, I mean, there's that natural defense mechanism to reject it because, like, it's inherently accepting that everything you know is pretty much a lie. And this gets back into, once you see that, like, how do you just go back into complacently accepting it? And I don't think you can. What do you think, Dflo? We haven't heard from you in a bit.
I mean, I think maybe I just pretty much agree. I vote agree.
Well, I mean, you're somebody that's like kind of been working on like breaking out of that system and kind of like going independent of it, right?
It's been a huge um logical journey. It's been very much more challenging in ways that I never expected. I've gone through a ton of just really intense anxiety because I have been only earning enough to pay my mortgage and super stressful, but somehow in the last month, I think I just started to relax anyways. Like it was just like, okay, I can freak out every day about money and not ever make art again because like the irony was like I was so chasing the dollar. I got out of my job. I guess I should back up. Like I was working in an elementary school as a therapist for children with severe emotional disorders, which things like they were throwing chairs, just stuff where the behaviors are very severe in the school and they need extra help. Had diagnoses that ranged between a lot of different things like trauma or autism or just like anything in between that, anxiety that was just extra severe. And so completely depressing and oppressive environment. And I was doing it to get my clinical hours. And it was just like taking everything out of me for 2.5 years to be in this like super oppressive environment
Well, right.
to and I had to like buy into their groupthink to be there too. So there was not just being in that environment, but there was like, well, you have to like put up with things and get along, and it did me in like a deep psychological way to the point where I was going to work there through this school year, but I cracked in like December, and December is also when I found Steemit. So it was like a really interesting synchronicity where it was like right when I was like from that job and burning out, and then I found something that inspired me, language coaching job. So I just like jumped from my job into like, okay, I'm just going to try it. I don't have any savings. I don't have family or anybody that can bail me out if I fuck this up. Do it because I can't morally be in that school environment anymore. And like on Ag Roads shows and on different shows here, people have talked a lot about the schools. And so I don't think I need to belabor that point. I think we all agree about why those are not for anyone. And they're especially not healthy for these kids that like, what a lot of these kids really needed. And I would sit there and fantasize like I wished I could just build them a spa. They just needed a break. They just needed like did not need to be there. And not only that, but they needed to like recover from like what society was trying to like force down their throats, most of them. I'd say some of them had like true mood disorders that were making it very hard for them to cope in any environment, and a spa day, a spa month wouldn't have changed that for them, unfortunately. But most of them, I think they needed a break. And it just sucked day in and day out to just be like, well, we're all stuck here. But anyways, so
Right. So,
when I broke out, I went through all this like psychological stuff of like, first it was really fun and I was making a bunch of art and I was doing a lot of posts. Then I freaked out about money and all I could do was like chase money. And now I've like come through the other side and I totally appreciate things like when you're talking about breaking out of that paradigm. I feel like I had to break through for like really understand like how much influence a lot of different things were having on me. And I'm sure I'll keep like peeling off the layers of the onion, social conditioning.
And see, like this tells me that like obviously you had a very similar experience to like what I did, and like getting out of that system, it's not easy. It's I mean, like, I'm tempted to say it's like hell, right? Like, whenever you're trying to figure out, like, what the fuck can I do to survive without relying on this system, then, like, whenever people, like start considering whether or not you can go back, like, to me, it's not really a question of money, right? Like, yes, I know I could go back and do these jobs and things that, like, I used to do for money, but it's really not even about the money of why I won't do it. It's about perpetuating that system, right? Like it's to me like it feels like if like I was in your situation, right? Like if I went back to work at that school, it feels like I'm perpetuating the cycle and like I'm accepting it. Like basically I'm consenting to the way that we do these things, and I fundamentally don't. Like, I disagree with that view of the world. I don't think it's okay. So, why am I going to let it be okay by me perpetuating that cycle?
Oh, yeah, that was the exact moral like meltdown that I had that made me just decide I needed to give notice right then as opposed to June. I gave my notice because I it was like every cell in my body was like, I cannot contribute to this machine anymore. Like I can't, my soul was like screaming at me. And I couldn't. And so, and then, but it was like hell getting out. It wasn't like, yay, freedom. It was like, oh. So I would just, I'm still kind of stabilizing, like now I took in a roommate. And I guess what I'm like trying to keep convincing myself of is that a problem comes up, I'm going to be able to figure out how to solve it. So I've gone months and I haven't been able to earn more than like $1,000 a month right now, which is not enough to live on where I live. So with especially with a kid. So I just took in a roommate, it's not, and that's not even going to be enough to like truly put me over the edge into comfort, but it at least gives me that little more of a margin
Well, what it tells me is that
and
you're
to keep pushing
receptive,
myself.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you're receptive to the fact that there are other ways to go about existing without being dependent on that system. Now, obviously, we still use dollars, like we still operate somewhat within that system. I mean, personally, I'd like to break even further away at some point to where I'm not like using US dollars and I'm not like, supporting like mega corporations and things like that at all. But, I mean, like, I'm taking it as I'm making progress. Like, the biggest step was I'm no longer dependent on doing things that I like fundamentally and morally disagree with to support the cycle of continuing to do things that I morally disagree with to keep making more money so that I can keep the cycle going. And that's really what that cycle's about, right? But like once we break that cycle and we see that it's possible, then we're receptive to all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and I definitely felt like I was staring at the impossible. Even like a month ago, I was just like, I was applying for jobs. I applied at the hospital near me to like room as the therapist in there. An interesting work, to support people and that. Like I don't know, but I also know that that's a system that's halfway broken too. So I would still be facing all of those same issues of like systemic apathy towards humanity and people suffering and systems not really being able to meet their needs and like all of this stuff that like depress me so much. I mean, I've met lots of really cool people who work within those systems and they try to be the good in there. And that's kind of what I would used to tell myself, right? Like, well, at least I can be this like person for these kids that like sees who they are and I can try to be a positive influence for them as much as I can in this living hell. But you just can't. You burn out. You can't live like that. And now I do. I feel really grateful. I'm like house and I am working for like corporations in a way, but I'm a contractor instead of an employee and I'm building my own business and everything I'm doing for my contract work is educating me for my business. So like everything is if I just don't think about utterly failing and like ending up homeless every day was what I was doing for a while. I'm doing it right, I'm doing what I want to do. And that's really trippy, but it's like it some sort of like psychological process to even get the fortitude wake up each day and just be like, okay, well, like I have no idea if I can build a business out of nothing, like literally nothing. But here I go. I'm going to do it again today. Let's see what tasks can I do today to like make that a reality, But somehow I feel like for the last month I've been able to do it. But yeah, it is like a weird hell of its own, but I guess I still would pick it, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't something is that I didn't expect and I didn't think I would. But
I think part of like that kind of coming around to that so like perspective, if you will, for people just in general is part of that is acknowledgement of self, the congruent of self and autonomy, and so like coming around to that point. And for some people, it's going to sound horrible, but for some people, it takes getting pushed down into the ground, like heavily put down, to have that realization. For those that are cruising along and everything's going fine because you're fitting within the mold of the system, and everyone's going like, this guy's getting along right, no problems. They don't tend to have the same perspectives because they haven't actually taken that stumble, that dive, that face full of dirt that makes them sort of like sit up and go, what the hell am I doing, like, really? And once you've sort of like gone through that, I think that's when you start questioning yourself, like what yourself and Clay have been saying right now is you have those moments where you have to like reflect on the self and really take stock of what it is, like who you are as a person, what it is that you're doing, where you're going, and what is acceptable for you. And that can be difficult for people to do when they don't have that, for the lack of a better wording, that struggle of taking a face plant.
Man,
yeah, and then maybe even taking multiple face plants. I mean, you just
Yeah.
like you get up and then you're like, oh, okay, I got it. Like I've had, I think, Wolf, I don't know how to say your whole name, but it's so true. It's about getting the momentum going. I feel like I got momentum going multiple times and I'll probably get scared again. But it's like I felt like I had this whole vision of how I was going to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, but I thought I would have by May. And then when May came around, I was like, fuck, I have not doubled my income. In fact, I've only like maybe made a 5% gain.
Hmm.
well,
Uh,
you know what I think, and this ties into what Wolf's saying here too. It's about developing faith in yourself, right? Like, it starts off with just developing some kind of faith, some kind of trust in something, right? Like you don't know why, but you believe that in some way it's gonna work out. And like the further you get in this process, and the more you start like developing this sense of faith, you start like having faith in yourself, and like that's something that like I have to like remind myself of sometimes still. And I mean, I've been doing this for almost like a year and a half at this point, right? Like this has been my only way to survive. Is I just pretty much I have faith that I'm not failing. Now, I mean, there are like some days I only make like $4 or $5.
Yeah.
And I mean that's like maybe a fourth of my expenses. But there are other days I do better, and I think the biggest thing is I like firmly believe no matter what happens, I'm still gonna succeed, right? Like I still have faith that I can do this. If I didn't have that faith, then I probably would have given up a long time ago.
Yeah.
But we have to have faith in ourselves.
Such a like a phrase I've heard over and over in my life, and I feel like I have a totally different understanding of that same phrase now than I did even just a year ago, even just 8 months ago. Like, I feel like it's so funny how these Fee was saying the layers of the onion thing, that we both have that analogy, but, like, even these sayings have these layers where you realize, like, okay, and like what Wolf is saying right now, like you can never guess the order of things. So like that's the faith, like I set a goal for myself that I needed to be earning like $2,000 a month by May. May came around and that was not the reality, so I thought I failed. And I thought everything was totally screwed and that I had imagined wrong and that my faith was false. I'd had all this faith in myself and then obviously I was wrong. Learned somehow, I don't know, I should, like, think about it. I don't really know the order of things of this last month or so where I just started realizing this other point of just, like, maybe I won't make I mean, getting a room my friend just literally came and knocked on my door. Speaking of knocking on doors, this is actually just proving your point. I was just hanging out flipping out about this very point, like, "Oh, no," and he just came over. I hadn't talked to him in a couple months. Mentioned at a party that I might need to take a roommate if this doesn't work, and he just came and knocked on my door out of the blue and was like, "Do you still want a roommate?" And that's how I have a roommate now because I was like, "Thank you, universe. Yes, I do," and even just being and so that was something that really boosted me right back up because I was like, "You just really don't know what's going to work out and help," and that I had to be receptive and say yes too, because even though I might be nervous about sharing my space because I'm such a hermit, whatever, like, I had to realize, no, this is a time where you say yes to this thing that's so weird that just happened, and I said yes, and that gives me this, like, psychological relief at least and puts my faith more into that this is going to happen for me, but, like, every single day, I just put my energy into it every day.
Okay, well,
I mean, I took
guys,
some days off this week for the first time in, like, a month. I just was like, "Okay, I'm gonna be a vegetable," but, like, I spend every day working on it.
okay, just to
And I
give
just
both of
yeah.
you a heads up, we only got like a couple of minutes left on the show, but just to like kind of like follow up on what you were saying, right? Like I think whenever we develop these expectations of how things have to happen, and like we try to define it, right? Like I have to be making $2,000 a month by X date. Then what we try to do is like we put like unrealistic expectations on what our perspective of success is, right? Like I've had to change my perspective on success so many times since I stopped working in that corporate life, to where literally my definition of success is every day that I get to continue doing, like living the life that like I believe and morally agree with is success to me. Like whatever that looks like, however it's allowed to happen, I'm receptive to that and I'm grateful for it. But we got like 2 to 3 minutes left, so if you guys want to put up any last thoughts.
Hope.
Go for it, Dflo.
Yes, for me, the success is, like, I'm working in my house with socks on and no shoes. Or just little things like that where I just go, "Oh my god, like, I haven't left the house in 2 days.
No pants! No
Awesome."
pants!
Yeah. Or I'm wearing the same outfit every day for, like, 3 days.
Right, but it's like
That's
who
my
gives
success measure right now.
right. Who gives a fuck if I don't put on pants for a whole 24-hour period, right? Like, I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm living a life that I morally agree with,
Hmm.
right? Like, I don't feel ashamed of anything in my life right now.
Yeah, and that's what it is for me as
Nice.
well. It's like, being your congruent self and autonomous self is just that's perfect for me. That's what it represents for me.
Congruent self. I think that's a good final word for this
Okay.
show.
Yeah, we are at less than a minute now, but I want to thank everybody that came out tonight. I know some people ended up having to go. This is the super late show on Saturday nights, but this has been the official 15th episode of Coffee and Philosophy here on MSP Waves. We had some wonderful guests as always. The Thunder from Down Under Cope, and the lovely Dflo, who always comes and charms us with her wonderful voice.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Much
For
love.
sure.
Thanks, man.
Sure, I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. Thanks everybody for coming out, and we appreciate all of you. Thanks, guys.